All right. So we're moving tonight into Lesson 5, and we will be in just a minute in Revelation chapter 6. If you want to open your Bibles there. So, week 1, I told you this would be our class schedule, that we would spend about 4 weeks setting the stage for the book of Revelation. And we've done that. We are tonight entering the second section of our class, where we're really going to now start digging into the story, the progression of events that the book will lay out. And we'll be doing that for the next few weeks before we get to our third and final section. So, what are our 4 keys? Audience. Time frame. Background. Style. Audience, background, time frame, and style become very important as we get into the story. We're going to see lots of new information and new things happen over the next couple weeks. Let's keep our keys in mind. We discussed the last few classes about the characters. We did a character study. If you did your lesson for tonight, you'll notice that I put the wrong number of blanks in the lesson. I think I did that last time I taught this too. So if that confused you, I'm sorry. We talked about 2 allies to God, to the saints in Asia Minor. First, obviously, being God. Second, being Jesus. And then we talked about 4 enemies of God's people. First off, Satan, the most important. And then the word that I used were his henchmen. We had Rome in different aspects, the political headship, the cult, enforcing the emperor worship, and then obviously the immorality and the immoral culture that went with it. All of those things stacked up against the saints. However, they had God and Jesus on their side. And we talked about Jesus in chapter 5, right? Jesus was the vision of the Lamb, right, who was able to do what? What was it that everyone was waiting to happen in chapter 5? For the scroll to be opened, right? Remember, chapter 5 was the dramatic scene, right? People are emotional. John himself was crying while seeing this vision, waiting for this scroll to be opened by the Lamb, or this book. And on it, it had 7 what? Do you remember? Yeah. Seals, right? It was sealed with 7 seals, and that's what we're going to see tonight. But before we do that, I'm going to kind of set up tonight's class and the next couple. Really, the rest of the book is going to be about what I'll call the groups of 7. There are 3 groups of 7 that we're going to see over the next multiple chapters and over the next multiple weeks that really are going to lay out our story, right? As the scroll is opened, these groups will be seen. We'll have the 7 seals, which we will see tonight. The next couple weeks, we'll look at the 7 trumpets. And then following that, the 7 bowls of wrath. These 7 groups are essentially the rest of the story that we're going to look at. That is how the story is structured in these groups of 7. That is going to be really our outline for the next 4 to 5 weeks, is hitting these 3 items, these 3 groups and the 7 items within them. I'll also go ahead and let you know up front that each one of these groups is structured in a very similar way. So we're going to talk about that for just a second. We'll see it tonight with the seals, and it will be true with the next couple. That as these items in these 7 are introduced, the first 4 of the group will look very similar to one another. They're going to be very closely related. You will see very common aspects between them. You will then see the 5th and the 6th, which will look slightly different. Still part of the same discussion, right? But they will look a little bit different. And then before you get to the 7th, John will go into what I'm calling the interlude, right? Where in each of these groups of 7, what John will do is he will take a moment to discuss something pertinent to that topic. For example, in tonight's lesson, right before we get to the 7th seal, John is going to take a moment to answer a crucial question that is laid out by these seals. And that's what that interlude will do before number 7, which will be a transition. So what I mean by that, the 7th of the group will transition us to the next of the group. So let me put this in its framework. Tonight, as we go through the seals, you can expect that the first 4 will look very similar to one another, okay? I'm going to ask you some questions about what they look like as we get through it. You should pick up on a pattern, okay? So be looking for that. The 5th and the 6th will differ, but will be a continuation. And then tonight we will end our class with this interlude, right? We will talk next week about the 7th seal, because the 7th seal is the 7 trumpets. And then later on, the 7th trumpet will transition into the bowls, right? So tonight we're going to talk about these seals in detail. So we are in chapter 6, and we will start in verse 1. Again, remember the scene here. Everyone has been waiting for this moment. The last chapter, emotion, drama, everyone waiting for these seals to be broken, and what will unfold when they do. So let's go ahead and read those. We're going to do these one at a time. So seal number 1, Revelation chapter 6, verse 1. It says, "Then I saw when the Lamb broke one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures saying, as with a voice of thunder, 'Come.' And I looked, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it had a bow. And a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer." What do we see? What does John see when seal number 1 is broken? What comes onto the stage? Did somebody say it? A horse and a rider, right? That is the action that takes place. We have this white horse. We have a rider with a bow and a victor's crown. And this rider went out to conquer. A very short description here to help us understand what this symbolizes, right? But there are a few details, right? A bow and going out to conquer. There is some fight taking place here. This person will play a part in that. There's a victor's crown, which would indicate to us that this rider is on the winning side. If you remember back a few weeks, this is how we laid out this book. There is a winning side, and there is a losing side. And this victor's crown would indicate maybe the winning side here. Now, like I said, that's not a lot to go off of. But to make things easier for us to kick this off, I will tell you what this means. Okay? This seal and this rider symbolize Jesus and the coming of the gospel. Now, you might be asking, Cody, how do you know that? The reason I know that is because I've read the rest of the book, and maybe you have too, right? We don't have a lot of detail here, but this rider will show up later in the book. So if you've read it, maybe you've seen it. Otherwise, we haven't gotten there yet. In chapter 19, this rider is seen in verse 11. It says, "And I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it was called Faithful and True. And in righteousness he judges and wages war. His eyes are a flame of fire, and on his head are many diadems. And he has a name written on him, which no one knows except himself. He is clothed with a robe dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God." Does that help you see why I say this rider is Jesus? Right? We see indications here, right? The eye is a flame of fire, right? That's a callback to chapter 1, which was very clearly a vision of Jesus. We have other details here about him being faithful and true, him being a judge. His clothes dipped in blood, maybe alluding to that sacrifice. And his name is called the Word of God. We know that being a phrase from the book of John, right? Referring to Jesus. So there are other indications throughout the book that tell us, if we come back here to seal number 1, we are looking at Jesus. Okay? And in what way does Jesus go out to conquer the world? Consider that question without getting too literal. Remember our style key. In what way does Jesus conquer the world? Put it on the board. Through his resurrection. And how does that conquer the world? He conquered death. He brought about salvation. The idea of bringing all men to God, which is the gospel, right? I put it on the board. Jesus bringing about the gospel that will go out and seek the hearts of men to bring them to God. That is the conquering the conquest that Jesus went on, and he was successful, pointing to that victor's crown. Jesus and the coming of the gospel is what seal number 1 represents. And this will become strengthened as we look through the other seals. But it's important to keep this in mind as we move forward, because we are looking now at a progression of events through these seals and the rest of the book. So everything that follows in this chapter and afterwards comes as a result of seal number 1. This will be a progression of thought. It's not just separate ideas. So let's go on to seal number 2. In verse 3, it says, "When he broke the second seal, I heard the second living creature saying, 'Come.' And another, a red horse, went out, and to him who sat on it, it was granted to take peace from the earth, and that men would slay one another. And a great sword was given to him." So describe what happens. What is the action that takes place? What do we see?
War.
What? War brought by what? What looks similar to the first seal here? I think somebody just said it. A horse and a rider, right? This red horse now, and a rider comes with it, with a sword, and he takes peace from the earth, bringing about the war that Matthew mentioned, right? He was right about what we see here. We see war brought by this rider. So, as I said, here you see what's similar to the first seal, okay? So, spoiler alert. When I ask about seal number 3 and seal number 4, the answer is a horse, okay? A horse and a rider, okay? Remember, keep that in mind when I ask about it in a minute, because we will see that similar theme go through here. So we're talking about peace being taken from the world by this rider. If we talk about what this symbolizes, right, I said this comes as a result of the first seal. So in what way is peace being taken from the world as a result of the gospel? Any ideas?
Well, it causes division. So, perceived peace, and it's perceived, it's not actual peace.
Exactly.
It's going to be interrupted.
Yes.
The gospel will do that.
Exactly. The gospel will do that. It will bring about division.
Peace with God, but enmity with the world.
There you go. I like that you said that, right? Peace with God, but enmity with the world, right? The gospel, when it was introduced, when Jesus came into the scene, into the world, and brought about everything that came with the gospel, it was not immediate peace. We know that. How did Jesus die? He was murdered, right? Very clearly, the things Jesus had to say did not immediately bring peace to the world. It took peace. It caused violence. And that is something we can expect from the gospel, to cause disunity and divisions and things like that. Now, you might be saying, right, the gospel is a good thing. That's kind of unfair to say. But consider what Jesus had to say. "Do not think that I came to bring peace on the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I came to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's enemies will be the members of his own household." So very clearly, Jesus was trying to get people to understand you can expect there to be some conflict as a result of what I'm teaching, and as a result of what you who listen to me will be moving forward. Jesus told us that. In the book of John, he says the same thing, right? "Do not be surprised if the world hates you, but know that they first hated me." So again, let me clarify. Don't hear me say the gospel is a bad thing, right? Because obviously there is peace with God and there's great things that come with the gospel. I'm not at all saying that it's a bad thing. But Jesus said, do not be surprised that bad things will come as a result, right? So now we jump back to our seal. It makes perfect sense now that we are talking about that conflict that comes from the gospel. Because again, what did we talk about in our key called background? This exact conflict, right? This is the scene we are in. This is the context of this entire book. This conflict that the saints are going through. Seal number 2 is talking about their current circumstances and the fact that it is because of Jesus that it is happening. It is because of the gospel and the division that comes with it, because of men's rejection. Right? Seal number 3 in verse 5. When he broke the third seal, I heard the third living creature saying, "Come." I looked, and behold, a black horse, and he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard something like a voice in the center of the 4 living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not damage the oil and the wine." What is it that we see come across the stage? A horse. Thank you for saying that. We see a black horse now and its rider with this pair of scales and this phrase that we'll get to in a minute. Right? What do we see happening as a result of this rider coming on the scene?
Basic necessities are scarce.
What is that?
Basic necessities are scarce.
Basic necessities are scarce in a way, yes. Right? What are scales? Do you guys know what scales are? It's not something we use too much anymore, at least in this context. It's what? It's a balance used where? In a market, right. It's a balance. It's used in a market. The idea of these scales, right, if I come up, maybe I'm buying some meat from a vendor, right, and he says, okay, this is worth 1 pound of silver. He'll put his 1 pound weight on this side, and I'll pile my silver on the other side until we see a balance, right? It's talking about business in the market is what these scales are alluding to. So we're looking at the business world at the moment and business transactions, which brings us to the quart of wheat for a denarius, right? And this phrase that goes along with it. If we define the terms here, a denarius is about how much one person could make with a single day's work. So you get up in the morning, you work all day. When you get home at the end of the day, you have made approximately 1 denarius, right? A quart of wheat is approximately how much food it takes for one person to eat for 1 day. So to define what this phrase is saying, right? You work all day long to make enough money for one person to eat. Does that equation work out well? Maybe if you're a single guy, right? I have a wife, I have 2 kids. That equation doesn't work for me very well, right? What is that alluding to? Economic hardships, right? It's talking about economic hardships. Because clearly, right, you think about that, a guy with a family and kids, he's not making enough money, right? He's not providing for his family. He's struggling in the market where these scales take place. Now, putting this back in its context, seal number 1, the gospel comes. Difficulty and division come as a result. Conflict occurs. God's people are being persecuted. After the persecution, do we see economic hardship amongst these people? Have we talked about that at all? Yes, we have. We talked about it last week, actually. We talked about it week 1, week 2, a couple other weeks. And last week, remember the mark of the beast, right? That idea that Christians could not do business, they could not buy and sell in the market if they did not have that mark, right? If they were not on that side. Christians had economic hardships. We've talked about it. That's very clear to us, I think, at this point in the class, that Christians were facing these kinds of things because of what they were going through. And there's this other phrase, which I didn't put on the slide, right at the end of that. Do not damage the oil and the wine is the way that seal ended, which I think is important. Because as Jane Ellen mentioned, right, there's a shortage of things and supplies and goods, but for who? Who had that shortage? Christians, right? The oil and the wine was not damaged. What this phrase is telling us here at the end is it's not a shortage on the whole world. Again, it's a shortage in this context according to this progression. Those who were following the gospel, seal 1, who were being persecuted, seal 2, those are the people who are going through this economic hardship. Because think, what did a Christian have to do if he wanted to solve his economic problem? Denounce God, bow down to the emperor, give in, and give up. That's all you had to do if you wanted to solve your economic problem. Now, clearly, we know that's not an acceptable option. Christians can't do that, right? But here's what Seal 3 is talking about. That the struggles and the difficulties you're going through, that difficulty you're facing every day in the market, saints in Asia Minor, is because of the gospel. It is because of this conflict. It is all a part of this story. And that is what this story, Revelation, is going to address. That is what God is here to deal with. Seal number 4. Verse 7. When the Lamb broke the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature saying, "Come." I looked, and behold, an ashen horse, and he who sat on it had the name Death, and Hades was following with him. Authority was given to them over a fourth of the earth to kill with the sword and famine and with pestilence and by wild beasts of the earth. What comes across the stage? What's on the scene? A horse, right? We have our fourth horse. Right? So this has been the four horsemen of Revelation, if you've heard that term. We have this ashen horse, and its rider, Death, followed by Hades, and it's given authority to kill. I don't think it becomes very difficult, right? Following the progression of events we've seen so far to figure out what this represents. Anybody want to take a stab at it?
Physical persecution.
What? Physical persecution to the point of death. Right? This is talking about death as a result of all of these other things we talked about. We know that the address to the church in Smyrna in chapter 2, be faithful unto death. Some of you are about to see tribulation completely. Jesus has warned that this is happening, and now we are seeing that in this context as well. The gospel has brought about a pretty rough situation on earth. Again, obviously there's a lot of good that comes with the gospel. That's not part of our discussion at this moment, but it will be later in the book. There's some bad stuff happening. For the saints in Asia Minor, we are contextualizing what you are going through and why it is happening, and using that as the stepping off point for the rest of this story. What you are going through is a result of the gospel. And death might come to some of you. Lots of bad stuff. Seal number 5. Let's keep reading. In verse 9, when the Lamb broke the fifth seal, I saw underneath the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and because of the testimony which they had maintained. And they cried out with a loud voice, saying, "How long, O Lord, holy and true, will you refrain from judging and avenging our blood on those who dwell on the earth?" And there was given to each of them a white robe, and they were told that they should rest for a little while longer, until the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who were to be killed, even as they had been, would be completed also. So what do we see on the stage here? No horse, okay? Right. We see a change here. The first four had horses. Now we don't, right? We're shifting away from that. No horse, but now a specific scenario to follow that line of thinking, right? We see souls under the altar, and we're told in verse 9 that these are Christians who had died as a result of this situation. It says those who had died because of the testimony they had maintained. Obviously, those who had held true to the gospel that Seal 1 talked about. And they're asking this question, how long will God put up with this? Now, let's avoid being too literal, okay? I don't think at this moment that the dead Christians who are waiting their reward in heaven are mad at God, okay? Some might interpret that from this text, right? But I think what we're doing is we're simply alluding to the question that is probably in everyone's minds. Whether anybody's saying it, surely they're all thinking this every night. How long is God going to let this go on? I mean, don't we ask the same kind of question when we go through hard things on this earth? Or when evil is allowed to do some very bad things in this world, we kind of think the same thing, right? How long is God going to let this go on? That's the question being introduced here. It's, I think, a fair question. And I think God is addressing that, but he is saying there is an answer. And what was the answer they were given? Be patient, right? Be patient. Hold on a little bit longer. There is something that has to be done before that judgment can come, and we're going to continue talking about that. Seal number 6 in verse 12. I looked, then he broke the 6th seal, and there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth made of hair, and the whole moon became like blood. And the stars of the sky fell to the earth as a fig tree casts its unripe figs when shaken by a great wind. The sky was split apart like a scroll when it is rolled up, and every mountain and every island were moved out of their places. Then the kings of the earth and the great men and the commanders and the rich and the strong and every slave and free man hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks and the mountains. And they said to the mountains and to the rocks, fall on us. Hide us from the presence of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to stand? How long, God, are you going to let this go on? Wait just a little bit longer is what God says. And now here in 6, what do we see happening? What was it? Earthquake. Okay, what else?
Sun darkens.
The sun darkens.
Great wind.
What? A great wind. Does this sound really good? No. This doesn't. What? It sounds like judgment, right? Probably because it's judgment. It's talking about judgment, right? God's wrath is now being brought on the world. Judgment is coming. We are seeing that judgment get very close now, and everyone is now standing in fear of its effect. Now, many people conclude, right, when they look at this text and this small section of text here in chapter 6, that we're talking about the final judgment at the end of time. And I do not believe that is true. The reason for that, we need to maintain the flow of thought in this chapter to differentiate what's happening here from final judgment, where we will face God and seek our reward. We're talking about a very specific set of circumstances. Christians being persecuted as a result of the gospel, going through difficult things, some even dying. God, how long are you going to let this go on? This is what's in question, this situation, these events. And God is saying in this seal, judgment is coming, and it's going to be frightening. But it is not final judgment. It is judgment on who? Specifically Rome, right? But broadly towards the message here is anyone who is persecuting God's people. Anyone bringing about that persecution and those on the other side. Now, Richard is obviously alluding to our keys, right? We are speaking now towards the saints of Asia Minor, and for them reading this is speaking about Rome. Judgment is coming, but it is delayed, right? God said, be patient, wait a little bit longer. But delayed judgment does not mean Rome is getting off the hook. All of those evil people doing these bad things, killing Christians, or withholding things from them in the market, they're going to get what's coming to them. But not yet. We're going to be patient. We're going to wait. And this seal is simply showing a little sneak preview of what's to come. The judgment that you're seeking, the judgment that answers the question of how long God will take care of it, will let this go on, is about to come. We are about to see it. But the Christians are told, wait a little bit longer. Now, like we said, the judgment that's talked about, right? Earthquakes, the sun darkening, this wind, all of these things. I said, this sounds pretty bad, right? How did people react to this judgment in this seal? What is it? Fear? What else?
They wanted the mountains to fall.
Yeah, that speaks to their fear, right? They are pleading to the mountains, fall on top of us so that you can shield us from the wrath of God. The wrath of God, the fear of God has been instilled in these people. You should fear what is about to come due to the evil that you are committing. These people are in fear of God and what is about to come, rightfully so. They are frightened. It is a scary scene that is laid out here. It is absolutely destructive, to the point that what's the question asked right at the end of chapter 6? Who is going to survive this, right? It specifically says, who shall stand this judgment that is about to come? Now that's the second question on everybody's mind, right? How long is God going to take to deal with this? And when he does, that looks bad. Who's going to be able to survive that? That's the question that is being asked, and that is the question that will lead us into what I told you earlier would come, what I'm calling the interlude. We're going to move to chapter 7, right? We're not done with this thought, because now John, through the visions he receives and what he's writing, is going to answer this question. The question is, who is going to stand the judgment that is to come? Here is what John is shown to answer that question. Revelation chapter 7, starting in verse 1. We're going to read just the first couple verses. After this, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth, so that no wind would blow on the earth or the sea or any tree. And I saw another angel ascending from the rising of the sun, having the seal of the living God. And he cried out with a loud voice to the 4 angels to whom it was granted to harm the earth and the sea, saying, do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we have sealed the bondservants of God on their forehead. And I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000, sealed from every tribe of the sons of Israel. So here, we're talking now, again, we're answering that question. Who is going to stand the coming judgment? Those were supposed to pop up one at a time. We're given here a little bit more of an indicator as to why the judgment is delayed. Right? Remember, it said, for those of you asking that question, you're going to have to wait a little bit longer. Well, here's why. What's the reason? Somebody tell me. What is it? Speak louder. Right. Those who are with God need to be sealed first. Right? God has got to identify who is on the winning side, who is on the losing side. Who are we going to bring this judgment on? Who shall stand? Well, first, before anything happens, we need to seal a few people. Right? We talked about this. This was the counter to the mark of the beast, right? Showing us that mark of the beast was figurative. This seal here also is figurative. Right? It's that figurative seal simply identifying which side of the battle you are on. Are you on the dragon's side, Satan, or are you on God's side? And God is saying, I'm delaying judgment so that I can stamp those seals on those who deserve it. That is what we are waiting for God to identify who is on which side and who is worthy of judgment. And we are told specifically here who that's going to be, right? This 144,000, it says in verse 4, sealed from every tribe of the sons of Israel. Right? Read with me, starting in verse 5, a further description of this 144,000 who will get this seal. From the tribe of Judah, 12,000 were sealed. From the tribe of Reuben, 12,000. From the tribe of Gad, 12,000. From the tribe of Asher, 12,000. From the tribe of Naphtali, 12,000. From the tribe of Manasseh, 12,000. From the tribe of Simeon, 12,000. From the tribe of Levi, 12,000. From the tribe of Issachar, 12,000. From the tribe of Zebulun, 12,000. From the tribe of Joseph, 12,000. And from the tribe of Benjamin, 12,000 were sealed. Now, I know that's a little bit repetitive, but I read it for a reason, which we'll get to in a minute. Let's talk about this. This 144,000 people who are going to be saved. We talked about this, that numbers have meaning in this book. Okay, this 144,000 number has got to mean something, right? So if we look at the numbers that we've got on our list, things that can help us make sense of this, we're going to focus on two numbers that are going to help us figure out what this means, and that's the 10 and the 12, right? 10, bringing about this idea of completion. That is a completion idea throughout the whole world. Many number systems are based on completion, right? You've got 10 fingers, probably most of us do at least. You're at least designed to. 10 is that idea of completion. 12 also the idea of completion, but now more completion focused on humans and men, right? We see this throughout our Bible, right? 12 tribes of Israel, as we'll see here. 12 apostles. 12 spies were sent into Israel, right? We see complete groups of men often shown in groups of 12, right? So 12 will give us that idea as well. So if we look at these two things, and we talk about, I want to get through, I'm missing some slides here. Yep, that's unfortunate. Okay, well, forget the slides. I'm going to have to just pretend you can visualize this. Okay? So if we're going to break down 144,000. To do that, we've got to do a little bit of math. Okay? So again, sorry I don't have a slide to show this. It was supposed to be visual. Right? If you break that number down mathematically, using our 10 and our 12, right? Some of you math people have probably already figured it out. If you take 10, the idea of completion, times 10, the idea of completion, and then you multiply that times 10, the idea of completion, right? You're up to 1,000 so far, if you're following me. Multiply that times 12, human completion. Now you've got 12,000, right, from each tribe of Israel. How many tribes of Israel? 12, right? Now another 12. So 12,000 times 12 gets us to what? 144,000, right? Do you see the point that is being emphasized through the number 144,000? Completion times complete times complete times complete times complete. Did I do my math right? Was that 5? Does that bring about any specific word to your mind? How about the word complete, right? You probably just heard me say that word more than you've heard it in your entire life. Okay, but that is the point of this 144,000. It is this absolute, complete group of what? Of Israelites, right? Of sealed people, right? But those sealed people are Israelites. He's going, you're right, right? The Israel of God. Right. You guys are going straight into it, right? Israel was who to God? His chosen people, those who he made the covenant with. So who shall stand? All, the complete group of God's chosen people, right? That's who is going to stand this judgment. The saints in Asia Minor are a part of that 144,000. You and me are a part of that 144,000, right? Anybody who is God's, anyone on God's side is a part of this 144,000. So this chapter is, do you know who teaches from this chapter quite frequently, speaking about this number? Yeah, JW, the Jehovah's Witness, right? And what do they teach from this? 144,000 people are going to heaven. No more, no less, right? Across all time, even though we've got billions of people on earth right now, across all time, 144,000 people are going to heaven. What is question number 1 we should ask our Jehovah's Witness friends?
You're lessening your chances.
Okay, that's fair. But specifically, if we look at this chapter and the interpretation, you're not wrong, by the way. Pretty bad odds. What? Are you an Israelite? That's a fair question. That's what I'm getting at. If 144,000 is literal, why isn't Israelite literal? What indicators do we see here to tell us that half of that is literal and half of it is not? The answer is nothing, right? It's figurative in every account, right? So to our Jehovah's Witnesses friend, right, they have reduced their odds by limiting the number of people who go to heaven. That is not God. We know from the rest of our Bible and the rest of Scripture, how does God feel about the world and who he desires to go to heaven? All men, right? God desires for all men to go to heaven. Not all will, but God wants all to. God is not limiting the number of people who can go to heaven. It is open to all, the complete whole group of his people, and that's who shall stand judgment. Now, a further question to ask of our friends who teach that 144,000 is literal is, have you read on in this chapter? Right? Let's keep reading in verse 9. It says, "After these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude, which no one could count, from every nation, all tribes, people, and tongue, standing before the throne, before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, and palm branches were in their hands. They cry out with a loud voice, saying, 'Salvation to our God, who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb.' And all the angels were standing around the throne, and around the elders and the four living creatures, and they fell on their faces before the throne and worshipped God, saying, 'Amen, blessing and glory and wisdom and thanksgiving and honor and power and might to our God forever and ever.'" Verse 13, "Then one of the elders answered, saying to me, 'These who are clothed in the white robes, who are they? And where have they come from?' And I said to him, 'My Lord, you know.' And he said to me, 'These are the ones who came out of the great tribulation, and they have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. For this reason they are before the throne of God. They serve him day and night in his temple, and he who sits on the throne will spread his tabernacle over them. They will hunger no longer, nor thirst any more. Nor will the sun beat down on them, nor any heat. For the Lamb in the center of the throne will be their shepherd, and will guide them to springs of water of life, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes." We got a little glimpse looking forward at what judgment was going to look like. Now we get a little glimpse of the other side. Here's what the coming reward looks like for those of you who get that seal. The complete group of God's people. Again, 144,000 is not literal. Why? Verse 9 tells us how many people. It's uncountable, right? No one could count the number of people. This 144,000 people equates to a group so large that it could never be counted. That is what the text describes, so we know this isn't literal, and it's all this same point. We get a glimpse here now of those of you who receive this seal, here's what you have to look forward to. So there's the two sides of the battle. Those who don't have the seal, who just a chapter before were fearful, were asking for the mountains to fall on them. We're asking to be shielded and hidden from God who would let his wrath out on them. Now, everybody else who gets this seal, they're sitting back going, we're good. They will never hunger. They will never thirst. The sun will never beat on them. No heat will ever touch their skin again. They are safe. They are protected. That's what this seal does. That's what those people have to look forward to. Which side do you want to be on? That should be a silly question, right? This is the side I want to be on. I want the seal. These people reading this book, the saints in Asia Minor, at this point in the story can go, okay, we can do this. We're on the right side of this. What we have coming is great. Tomorrow might be rough, but it's okay, because we've got something great to look forward to. So to summarize, these seals have really framed our story and have set the stage for this coming judgment that we know is about to get here. It's about to come very soon, and the next group of 7 will start to address those things, which we will look at next week. And I think that's probably going to take us 2 weeks to get through the trumpets, so have the entire next lesson ready for next week, but that'll probably take 2 weeks, but we'll find out next week. So thank you for listening. If you have any further questions about any of this, feel free to come talk to me, but thank you. I'll see you next week.